Chapter 34. By now, the defenders at either end of the west rampart had retreated into the two corner towers. Horace inspected the solid oak door of the southwest tower and frowned. It would take a small battering ram to break through, he thought, and he assumed the northwest tower door would be no easier. Below, he heard shouting voices and the sound of running feet. Peering over the edge of the walkway, he saw members of the garrison streaming out of the towers into the courtyard. They were heading for the main gateway, where the fortified gatehouse would give them shelter from the attackers. The way down through the two towers was blocked, but Battle himself had shown them another route to the courtyard. Horace gathered the Scandians around him. Several had been wounded during the fighting, and he left 2 of them to look after Trobar. The others were still fit for battle. He led them down the narrow steps beneath the trapdoor that Battle had used. As they reached the courtyard, he knew their tendency would be to stream after the retreating garrison in an undisciplined throng. He restrained them by sheer force of will until all of them were down the stairs. Then, forming them into an arrowhead formation, with himself at the tip and Gundar and Nils to his left and right, he led them at a steady, disciplined jog towards the fleeing defenders, currently jostling each other to get through the narrow entrance to the gatehouse. Hearing the battle chant of the Scandians as they approached, those inside the gatehouse slammed the iron-bound oak door shut, leaving nearly 20 of their comrades locked out, backs to the wall, facing their attackers. When there was less than 10 meters between the two groups, Horace raised his right hand into the air and called the order to halt. He had the natural gift of command, and it never occurred to the Scandians to ignore him. "Form a line," he told them, and the arrowhead formation spread out into one line, facing the terrified enemy. "I'll give you one opportunity to surrender," he told the members of the garrison. "That opportunity is now." Keren's men eyed the Scandians fearfully. In normal circumstances, they would have surrendered readily enough, but this battle was far from normal. They knew these savage sea wolves were in league with supernatural forces. They had all seen the terrifying apparitions that had risen from the mist in the south. If they surrendered, they had no idea what would become of them. Perhaps they would be sacrificed to the huge warrior they had seen, or the red-faced demons who soared into the night sky. This was more than a normal battle, they all knew. In this battle, they were pitted against the forces of the underworld, the black evil of sorcery, and no sane man would willingly surrender himself to such an enemy. A long silence greeted Horace's challenge. None of the garrison would take responsibility. None wanted to single himself out. Finally, Horace shrugged in resignation. "I gave them a chance," he said softly. Then he turned to the wolf ship's girl. "Gundar, can you take care of this?" Gundar, who had recovered his axe and was anxious to use it again, snorted in derision. "This ragtag bunch," he said. "Nils and I could do it on our own. You go and help the ranger, General." Horace nodded. He slid his sword back into its scabbard and stepped out of the line. Gundar waited until one of the other Scandians moved into the space Horace had vacated. Then he raised his battle axe and roared out the time-honoured Scandian battle command. "Follow me, boys!" There was a roar from 23 throats, and the battle line surged forward. They hit the defenders with a crash of steel, driving the terrified castle garrison back against the stone walls of the gatehouse. Horace watched for a second or two, then turned to run towards the keep tower. Will had entered the keep some minutes earlier. The entrance hall and the dining hall beyond it were deserted. The garrison would have all been on the ramparts, he realised, and the servants were probably cowering somewhere below, in the cellars and the kitchen. Keren, he knew, would have headed for the top of the tower. Will ran to the stairway now, set in the centre of the keep hall. The keep at the lower levels was an expansive building, with dining hall, sleeping quarters, and administrative offices taking up the first 3 floors. Above this, it narrowed to the tower that Will had climbed, set back in line with the north wall and wide enough for only 1 or 2 rooms on each floor. At the lower levels, the stairs were located centrally, a broad stone stairway that would be difficult to defend. Once he reached the tower itself, however, he knew that the stairway would be a narrow spiral, set to the left-hand side and twisting to the right as it ascended. In that way, a right-handed swordsman climbing the stairs would be at a disadvantage to a right-handed defender. The right-hand spiral meant that an attacker would have to expose all of his body in order to use his sword, while the defender could strike with only his right side exposed. It was a standard design for a castle tower. He pounded up the first 4 floors, then swung left towards the spiral stairs, slowing down as he went. He couldn't see what lay in wait around the curved stone walls, and it was only prudent to assume that Keren could have left men to delay any pursuers. One man could hold the stairway indefinitely, as attackers could only approach 1 at a time. Will considered the bow in his hand and decided it was not the right weapon to use in the restricted space of the stairwell. He slung it over his shoulder and drew his sax knife instead. Heavy enough to deflect a sword stroke, it was also short enough to swing easily in the confined space. All in all, a better choice, he thought. He paused at the entrance to the stairwell, letting his breathing settle. Silent movement would be his main advantage in this situation, and it was hard to remain silent when your breath was coming in ragged gasps. He started up the stairs, moving carefully, his soft boots making no sound on the stones. He was grateful that it was a stone staircase. In some castles, the designers used wooden stairs, loosely fastened so that they squeaked in protest underfoot. Carefully, he stole his way upwards. The stairway was lit at intervals by torches in brackets. They created another problem for him. As he passed the first, his shadow loomed onto the wall above and in front of him, giving ample warning that he was approaching. If he were defending these stairs, he thought, he would wait beyond one of the torches, looking for the approaching shadow of an attacker moving upwards, so that he could... A sword blade glittered blood-red in the torchlight as it flashed down at him from above. He leaped back, managing somehow to retain his feet, as the blade struck sparks off the wall and steps. His heart raced. Apparently, the unseen defender agreed with him on the best place to wait for an attacker. He paused, waiting to see if the swordsman on the stairs above would show himself. But there was nothing. He heard a faint chink of metal on stone, possibly the man's mail shirt brushing against the wall as he changed position. Seconds passed. Will frowned as he contemplated the situation. All the advantages lay with the man above. He could remain unseen. The shadows thrown by the torchlight would warn him of Will's approach. The torchlight! That was the answer. He retreated a few paces down the stairs until he reached the torch in its wall bracket. Tugging it free, he started up the stairs once more, sax knife in his right hand, torch in his left, held out as far as he could reach. Stopping just short of the spot where the sudden attack had come out of the darkness, he tossed the torch underhand up the staircase. It hit the outer wall and rebounded into the centre of the stairs, its flickering, uncertain light now behind the spot where the defender waited. Will saw a giant shadow looming in the stairway as the man above him moved to retrieve the torch and throw it back down again. He darted up the stairs, taking advantage of the momentary distraction. He had time to hope there wasn't more than one man waiting above him. There was a dark shape on the stairs, bent over to reach for the torch, blocking its light. The man saw him too late and swung an awkward, off-balance overhead cut with his sword. Will deflected it easily, the sword blade shrieking off the stones, then continued his upward movement and lunged, feeling the sax knife bite into flesh. The man cried out in pain and stumbled forwards. He crashed into Will, and the ranger grabbed him with his left hand, just in time. There was a second man waiting, and he leapt forward now, cutting at Will with his sword. But the stroke was blocked by the body of his own comrade, slumped against Will. The first defender screamed again as the sword took him across the back, shearing through his mail shirt. Desperately, Will shoved him away and bounded back down the stairs, leaving the body between him and the second defender. The wounded man lay moaning, and Will saw another shadow moving, heard hard-shod feet on the stairs as the second defender retreated upwards, placing the light between himself and Will once more. The light on the stairs was dark and uncertain now, with the torch lying on the steps rather than placed high on the wall in its bracket. Will moved carefully upwards once more, using the tip of his sax to reach forward and flick the fallen man's sword back down the stairs. It rang loudly on the stones as it bounced. He started forward again, moving infinitely slowly to avoid the slightest noise, his own ears searching the silence for the sound of any movement. Then he heard it. Breathing. It was barely perceptible, but it was there. The in and out breathing of a man whose adrenaline is running at full charge through his veins. He couldn't be more than a few meters away, Will knew. He paused, seething with impatience. Somewhere above him, Keren had Alice, doing God knows what with her, while Will wasted his time playing tag on the stairs with these men. He searched for an idea, but none came. Suddenly, he darted forward 4 paces, then quickly reversed direction and sprang back as another sword, wielded by an unseen defender, rang off the stones. The man was there. He was ready and waiting. He was alert. He was just around the next bend in the stairs. An idea started to form. Will estimated the man's position, his eyes measuring the curvature of the outer wall of the stairway. The defender would be just beyond that bend in the wall, so if Will moved backwards a little, he could find a point midway between him and the unseen defender. Silently, he descended 3 steps, then a 4th. He sheathed the sax knife and unslung the longbow from his shoulder. Carefully nocking an arrow, he studied the wall, picking a point that would be halfway between his position and that of the man who waited for him. He raised the bow and drew, aiming at the stone wall above him, pausing to estimate the right position. Then he released. And, in the rapid succession that only a ranger could achieve, within a few heartbeats he sent another 3 arrows after the first, all aimed at the curved wall, allowing a slight variation with each. The arrows struck and ricocheted violently from the stone, striking sparks as they went, flying around the curve in the wall in a sudden volley. Above him he heard a cry of surprise, then a muffled curse and a clang of metal on stone as at least one of the arrows found a mark. But he was already bounding up the stairs, catching the startled defender by surprise. The man, totally unprepared by the sudden volley of ricocheting shots, had dropped his sword as he tried to free an arrow from a painful wound in his side. He looked up in fright as Will appeared, then glanced to one side to where his sword lay on the stones. It was that moment of delay that brought about his downfall, literally. Will grabbed his shirt front and heaved him down the stairs, sending him crashing into the outer wall, then tumbling head over heels down the staircase. The man shrieked in pain as the arrow in his side was driven deeper. Then he was silent, the only sound his inert body sliding a few meters further down the stairs. Will retrieved his other 3 arrows, inspected them briefly. The heads were slightly bent where they had skated off the stone wall, but they would serve for the same purpose again. In fact, he thought wryly, they might even be better suited to the task now. He continued up silently, alert for another sudden attack. But there would be none. Keren's 3rd man had listened as his 2 companions had been overcome by their mysterious pursuer. He had seen nothing, but he had heard the screech and clanging of swords and arrows on stone, then the ominous sounds of falling bodies on the steps. He waited at one curve until he saw the elongated shadow of whoever it was who had disabled his comrades, saw it moving towards him as the attacker moved upwards. And his nerve went. He could hear the cries of the Scandians in the courtyard. He knew the battle was over. He had seen the monstrous shadows in the night sky. Now he saw this other shadow coming after him silently. He turned and ran up the stairs to the next landing, where a tower room offered him shelter. He plunged inside and slammed the door behind him, shooting the bolt across to keep intruders out. Will heard the running footsteps, heard the door slam shut. Throwing caution to the winds, he went up the stairs like one of Mallkallam's rockets, taking them 2 and 3 at a time to get to Alice before Keren could harm her.